this was actually one that I recorded last. And I'm like, I have a video talking about there's something wrong with the Fever, how they look defeated, everything. And I still stand by those videos, especially because some of them are reactions at the time, right after the game. So, I mean this when I say this. Fire Stephanie White yesterday. Like, fire her yesterday. And the reason why is not that Stephanie White is a bad basketball coach. It's not that Stephanie White is a bad motivational speaker. It's not that Stephanie White has done a bad job defending her players. It's not any of that. It's that Stephanie White and Caitlyn Clark fundamentally have different understandings of the sport of basketball.
The biggest threat to Caitlyn Clark's historic rookie season wasn't a rival team or a hostile crowd. It was her own coach. In a bizarre strategic move that baffled the entire sports world, Indiana Fever's coach Stephanie White began systematically sidelining her superstar's talent, turning the most lethal scorer in college basketball history into a glorified decoy on the court. This wasn't just a bad game plan, it was a public display of coaching malpractice that ignited a firestorm of outrage and reportedly forced a Hall of Fame executive to intervene before the entire franchise imploded from within. This is the story of what really happened.
So I had a film breakdown prepared today, but I'm actually going to go a different direction. This is a rant because we have to talk about the state of this Indiana Fever team, and I'm here to bring the reality to all you Fever fans. This team is not a championship team. They're not a championship team. They're nowhere near close to a championship team because every team that is a championship team can play defense. This Indiana Fever team has no defense, and that's like the farthest of their problems. Their offense looked really bad today, and Caitlyn Clark obviously didn't shoot the basketball well, but I'm not going to blame this loss on Caitlyn Clark, even though obviously they would have won if she would have shot the ball well.
It was the game that broke the internet's collective brain. The Indiana Fever, facing the defending champion Las Vegas Aces, didn't just lose, they looked utterly, hopelessly lost. Their offense sputtered and stalled, at one point scoring a pathetic 9 points in an entire quarter, a number more fitting for a middle school game than a professional contest. But the most bizarre sight wasn't the lopsided score. It was Caitlyn Clark, the most electric, paradigm-shifting offensive force to enter the league in decades, being used as a glorified decoy.
To go an entire game where they have not scored more than 20 points, where they have a quarter where they only score 9 points, and to call yourself a professional basketball team is pathetic. To call yourself a professional basketball coach of that team is pathetic. I watched that whole game, and other than Ari McDonald, Aaliyah Boston with a moment here and a moment there, nobody made any type of memorable impact on that game.
The game plan seemed to be an exercise in absurdity. She would bring the ball up the court, make one pass, and then dutifully jog to the corner, effectively taking herself out of the play as if she were a role player just happy to be there. The most dangerous weapon in the building was being holstered, and every single person watching, from the cheap seats to the broadcast booth, knew that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. This wasn't just a bad game plan. It felt like a deliberate suppression of talent.
And said, man, I want to speak on some recent comments that I saw coming across about Caitlyn Clark and the Indiana Fever, right? And this just speaks to a point that I made earlier about like people. It just shows that like how fickle fans are, right? And so, you know, like the Fever yesterday just lost to they lost to the Aces, right? And their record is 6 wins, 7 losses. Same thing for the Aces. Their record is 6 wins and 7 losses. But for the Fever, you know, you have people who are, you know, who want to already run the coach Stephanie White out of town.
While fans were shouting at their television screens in disbelief, a basketball titan was reportedly watching with a far more potent, calculated rage. That titan was Linn Dunn, the Fever's own general manager, a Hall of Fame coach, a WNBA champion, and one of the most respected minds in the history of women's basketball. For Dunn, this wasn't just a frustrating loss on the schedule. It was watching a priceless, franchise-altering asset being actively squandered.
The reason you lost was not because Caitlyn Clark didn't score the basketball. The reason you lost is because you stopped doing what was working. What worked for the Indiana Fever, especially in that first half, was a pick and roll with Caitlyn Clark and Aaliyah Boston. All you have to do is have a pick and roll at the top of the key. Off that pick and roll, 2 defenders are going to go with Caitlyn Clark, leaving Aaliyah Boston to have a wide open lane. That is just the play you should go to every single possession. But how come we never go to it in back-to-back possession? We'll go to it one possession, the next possession we don't go to it. Why not? Stephanie White, why not? It always works. 2 defenders are always going to go with Caitlyn Clark. There should never be a play where Caitlyn Clark brings the ball up the court and then she passes it and she runs off the playoff ball.
This was the player she drafted to revitalize a city, sell out arenas, and build a dynasty around. To see her neutralized not by an opponent's masterful defense, but by her own team's baffling strategy was reportedly more than she could stomach. The quiet frustration in the stands was nothing compared to the seismic eruption said to be brewing in the front office. A storm was coming for Stephanie White, and it had a Hall of Fame resume backing it up.
What was the game plan against her to kind of slow her down?
Well, like I said pregame, it was just to try to make everything as difficult as possible. Like, Asia's one of the best players in the world. You're not going to stop her. So we just needed to make it difficult, and I thought AB did. But Asia did what great players do, and they step up in the fourth quarter, and that's what she did. Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is what we have to do as a staff to get her better looks, like higher quality looks. Every game plan is going to be to make her score inside the three-point line.
The most infuriating part of the entire fiasco, the solution was painfully, blindingly obvious. The few times the Fever offense looked competent, let alone unstoppable, it was when they ran the simplest, most devastating play in their book. A pick and roll with Caitlyn Clark and star center Aaliyah Boston. It's Basketball 101. When that play was called, opposing defenses were forced into an impossible choice. Either let the greatest shooter in college history get an open look, or send 2 defenders to stop her, leaving a 2-time All-Star in Boston wide open for an easy score.
So yes, the definition of Murphy's Law is anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Now, I'm being kind of dramatic here, but the Indiana Fever are down coach Stephanie White for an indeterminate amount of time. She is out for personal reasons. Stephanie White and her partner, Lisa Salters, who is also a sideline reporter for some NBA games. She is a sideline reporter for the NFL. They were both out at the same time, most recently, like a couple weeks ago. This is completely a personal reason, but there's obviously something that they're dealing with at home. But the adversity that the Indiana Fever have faced this season, I don't know that I've ever seen a team just go down so many key players and key factors to the roster. I mean, I don't know if a coach would be like a key roster member, but
it worked nearly every single time it was attempted. So why, possession after agonizing possession, did the team completely abandon it? Instead, fans were treated to a confusing, chaotic mess of stagnant isolation plays and clunky, contested mid-range jumpers that felt like a throwback to a bygone era. It was as if the coaching staff was deliberately choosing the hardest, least effective path, leaving everyone to wonder if they were watching a professional basketball game or a bizarre, high-stakes experiment in how to systematically neutralize your own best player.
Not even different understandings. What Stephanie White wants to do is not going to work for this team. It is not going to work for this team. What Stephanie White wants to do will not work. And by the way, I'm not saying what Stephanie White wants to do is won't work in general. Won't work in general. Because it has worked. She's had success. But I'm saying what Stephanie White wants to do will not work for this team specifically. And let's take a listen to what Caitlyn Clark said. And she essentially exposed that Stephanie White wants them to play slow.
The tactical confusion was bad enough, but the human toll was written all over Caitlyn Clark's face. The fiery, passionate competitor who argued with refs, pumped up crowds, and played with a joyful ferocity in college was gone. In her place was a player who looked resigned. The fire in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet, vacant fog. Fans and analysts pointed to clips of her on the bench, looking completely checked out, her expression empty as her coach yelled instructions in her ear.
About the difference we've seen from Caitlyn Clark since that Connecticut Sun game. I do think she is partly sick, but there are also a lot of other issues going on. She's been a completely different player And I don't mean just missing the threes. There is no fire there. There's no arguing with the officials. There's no getting the crowd revved up. It seems like she's almost checked out, resigned herself to being less than in order to please a coach that wants to take away Caitlin Clark's strengths. I don't know how else to describe it at this point. As you can see in this picture, I saw this. I want to share this because this just gave me flashbacks to early last season. Now, of course, Christy Sides doesn't have the ego that Stephanie White does, and she recognized what was going on and basically eventually post-break gave Caitlin Clark the keys and said, do your thing. But does Caitlin Clark look okay? And Steph yelling in her ear, nope, absolutely she does not look okay.
This wasn't just a player in a slump, it was a player being suffocated by the system around her. The smiles were tight, the nods were slow, and her body language screamed a polite Midwestern fury, the kind of silent, simmering frustration that is almost more terrifying than a public outburst. She seemed to have resigned herself to being a lesser version of her superstar self, all to please a coach whose system was actively taking away her greatest, most game-changing strengths.
I'm sorry, but this is a regular season game. There's no player that's going to be that depressed about a loss. The emotion that she's having right now, that's emotion that you have when you lose a championship. But they didn't lose a championship, so it's only one other thing. It's the coach. I knew something was up, y'all. I played basketball all my life. I played point guard. There was something off about Miss Caitlyn when I was watching that Aces game. And I couldn't put my finger on it. It just seemed like Miss Caitlyn, she was definitely unmotivated. She looked defeated the whole game. She didn't look like she was having fun. And that is always because of the coach.
It didn't take long for the digital world to declare a state of emergency. Social media absolutely detonated. Reddit threads turned into strategic war rooms, with fans drawing up their own play diagrams and posting frame-by-frame breakdowns of Clark being ignored while standing wide open on the wing. On X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, former players and analysts weighed in, their commentary dripping with a mix of disbelief and professional outrage.
I don't care. When we're talking about impact, nobody on that team made impact that game. The coach made no impact. Bonner made no impact. Howard made no impact. Colson made no impact. Mitchell made no impact. Lexi Hull made no impact. Damaris Dantas had her worst game of the season. I'm not out on you, Damaris. It was just the worst game of all season. We got to call a spade here. Aaliyah Boston had a few moments, and Ari McDonald are the only two players that I can sit and I can actually say to you without lying and feeling dirty about myself, saying those two players at least had some type of impact on the game. As for the rest of you, you need to give Kelly Krauskopf back your money.
TikTok was flooded with viral videos comparing her dynamic, free-flowing college highlights to her static, restrained role on the Fever. The public outcry was deafening. It was no longer a niche basketball debate, it had become a mainstream spectacle, a top trending topic. Everyone could see the problem, from the die-hard fan with season tickets to the casual observer who had only tuned in to see what all the hype was about. The universal consensus made the coach's refusal to fix it all the more glaring and inexplicable.
All right, Fever fans, it's time to have a very difficult conversation. One that we don't really want to talk about. The question is, what are we going to do about Stephanie White? You know, a lot of you were screaming, get rid of Christy Sides. For Stephanie White, you were happy, you were excited, you were stoked. But I think Stephanie White has a lot to do with this team's failures. Some of you out there, of course, will put this on Caitlin Clark's play in the last couple games, but I put it on the scheme. I put it on the game plan because a really, really, really good coach looks at its talent. Kelsey Mitchell, Boston, Caitlin, and go, they make a game plan to make that work.
The widespread public outcry forced an even darker question into the light. Was this just staggering incompetence? Or was it a matter of ego? Was Stephanie White a coach so in over her head that she couldn't see the obvious solution right in front of her? Or, as many began to speculate, was this a deliberate power play? In the high-stakes world of professional sports, coaching egos can be fragile things.
And I just think that it's way premature for something like that, right? I said it yesterday on my podcast, and I before the game even started, I said that the Fever needs to continue to develop their chemistry, right? Caitlyn Clark missed 4 or 5 games, and so here we are, 13 games into the season. They 1 game below 500, and people are ready. Some fans are jumping the ship, or not just jumping the ship. Fans are ready to, they want to fire Stephanie White.
Some theorized this was a classic battle of wills. A veteran coach determined to prove that her system was king, even if it meant subjugating a rookie superstar to do it. It was a high-risk gamble to establish dominance, forcing Clark to buy into a team concept by neutering the very individual brilliance that made her a phenomenon. It was no longer a simple coaching issue. It had the makings of a full-blown identity crisis, a strategic Cold War being waged in the locker room and played out in front of a horrified national audience. Then, almost as if in direct response to the public execution and the rumored pressure from the front office, something shifted. After the relentless media storm, the Fever's very next game looked different. Suddenly, the ball was back in Caitlyn Clark's hands. The pick and roll with Aaliyah Boston, once a rare treat, became a staple of the offense. It wasn't a total overnight transformation, but it was a clear, undeniable, and immediate correction. But this change didn't feel like a moment of coaching genius or a sudden strategic revelation. It felt like a reluctant surrender. It felt like a coach who had been publicly shamed into running the most obvious play in basketball. The immediate crisis was averted, but the damage was done. The trust between player and coach, and between the coach and the fans, now seemed paper-thin and irrevocably fractured. And so, a fragile, unspoken truce now hangs over Indiana. The entire saga has become a shocking cautionary tale about how to mismanage a generational talent. Stephanie White may have adjusted her playbook, but she is now coaching under a microscope, her credibility having taken a massive hit. Now, every single possession is scrutinized, every substitution questioned. Is Caitlyn Clark truly being unleashed, or is she still on a leash, just a slightly longer one? The power struggle may have gone quiet for now, but the fundamental question remains, hanging over every game like a storm cloud: who is really in charge of the Indiana Fever? Because when you draft a player destined to rewrite the record books, you're supposed to hand her the pen, not hide it in the coach's office. The whole world is now watching, waiting for the inevitable explosion.